You know, I bought a whole lot of tissues with me today for a reason. I think this is one of the hardest messages I have preached in 50 years of my Christian life. I came to know the Lord when I was 29 years old. I'm now 79 by God's grace. And Father's Day is a wonderful day for many of us who have come from a very emotionally healthy background. We've had fathers who cared for us and loved us and, been there for us. But unfortunately, that's not the story of everybody. And last night, I was up till about 4 o'clock in the morning, just reading and looking at statistics, and what I read shattered me, because I had to grow up without a father. Okay, my father left home when I was a baby, and I never saw him again. Okay, and I didn't realize that the impact of that loss would shape my life for 29 years. At a very early age, I became an alcoholic at about 17. And by the time I was 23 years old, people looked at me and said, there's no hope for him. And then last night, I began to understand the impact of fatherlessness. Today, in the body of Christ, the greatest need is for fathers. In the context of culture, the greatest need is for fathers. And the sadness is that when you have never had an emotionally wholesome relationship with a father, you will grow up with what we call a wounded spirit. It is easier to build up a child than it is to repair an adult. Wow, that hit me. It is easier to build up a child than it is to repair an adult. And here are some of the consequences of dysfunctional fathering. Number one, you have a 4 times greater risk of not breaking the cycle of poverty. I got these statistics yesterday. Number 2, young people who grow up without functional fathering become rebellious at a very early age, because unconsciously they are seeking their father's attention. Number 3, if you're a young woman, you are 7 times more likely to get pregnant as a teenager. Wow. Your addiction to drugs, alcohol, and pornography might become a habit at an early age. And lastly, there is twice the possibility you will drop out of school at an early age. And I can identify with all this. So I'm talking from my own experience. And as I began to look at these things, God began to minister to my own spirit at about 3 o'clock in the morning, as I began to understand, hey, that's me. But for the grace of God. We live in a world where there's a lot of pressure on fathers today. And I believe with all my heart that the one relationship that the enemy will attack most is the relationship between a father and a child. Because when that relationship gets fractured, it is going to affect all other relationships as a child grows up into adulthood. Number one, it will affect your marriage. In our country, we have laws against physical abuse. And it is amazing the number of young women and even older women who seek refuge in refuge homes because of the extent of physical, emotional abuse in the home. It's amazing. We come from a first world country. We have everything. But somewhere down the line, a child who was abused emotionally or physically by a parent is most likely to repeat the pattern. I read a note in a Facebook page of a young man who became a Christian. And this is what he said. It took me 30 years to wipe off my father's face from the face of God the Father. Wow. I identify with that. I'm 50 years in ministry, 50. But to this day, I have a deep lack of understanding of how I should relate to God as a father because I never had one. And I want to speak to fathers, I want to speak to children, I want to speak to husbands, because as children, as teenagers, you wouldn't understand the load emotionally, mentally, and materially that your fathers carry. You wouldn't understand. Somebody's on the phone. You wouldn't understand the pain of fathering today. And the question you often ask as teenagers is, why is my father so strict with me? And why does he put curfews on me? And why is it that I have to follow this rule and follow that rule? And I don't like the rules. Luke chapter 15, the young man said, I'm leaving my father's house and I'm going as far away as I can to get away from him. That's rebellion. And Satan is the source of rebellion. I had a rule in my house that my children's doors can never be closed. Because I know if the door is closed, something is going on inside there that I'm not supposed to see. And I had a young son who was about 15 years old, and he decided to challenge my authority from time to time. And regrettably, I never handled him in the right way. And one day I told him, one more time that door is closed, I'll break the door down. So you'll have no door. And he left home at about 18. And for a long time, we just didn't have that emotional connection. Because in bringing him up, I had wounded his spirit, not being conscious of it. I was brought up by my grandmother, who was a matron in a school, and she was strict and she was harsh. And as a child growing up, I didn't understand why all this was happening to me. That's why I chose to rebel at a very early age. And there were tragic consequences that I had to live with for a long time. But I repeated the pattern with my own children. I repeated that pattern because as a child, my children didn't know that the boundaries I put were for their protection because I never explained those boundaries to them. Because I didn't feel the need to. Then I became a pastor. And the culture I come from, we were taught, you're a pastor first and you're a father second. Not true, from my perspective. I should have been a father first and a pastor second. And so once again, there was a consequence. And I didn't have the understanding I had now. In Psalm 27, verse 10, David says, though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord has taken me up. Now, I don't have time to go into that, but David grew up with feelings of abandonment. And so when we as fathers are busy providing for our children, we have to sit them down and explain that this is a sacrifice that has to be made for your betterment. But we often don't do that. I have noticed one thing about men. Men talk little. Men talk little, right? How many of you ladies can say that? Put the hand up. Most men, yes, no, maybe. But a man will talk to a man. I don't know what the dynamic is. My wife always says, you don't talk to me. You talk to the people in the church. I don't know why. I don't know what's happening in this emotional clock on the inside. Because I had to grow up in a home where my grandmother rarely talked to me. She only spoke to me when she wants to give me an instruction. And so I can sit in a room with a book, be all alone, and be content. Because I was dysfunctional. David was the most dysfunctional man in the entire Bible. David was one of the most angry men in the Bible. And when you chart David's life, you see points of deep anger. If you read these Psalms very carefully, looking for the anger pattern, you will find it. And anger is a key issue among men, although we rarely talk about it. Because we believe falsely that when we commit our lives to Christ, everything gets fixed up. Not true. Your salvation is secure. We are body, soul, and spirit. But in the soul area, there is some wounding that we carry. And we don't understand why we react suddenly. Because we carry feelings of rejection. Nobody gets angry on purpose. David was an angry leader. But he's still called by God. So we have to have a disconnect between the two. Moses is called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Moses, in his early childhood, had to grow up without the fathering love of his own biological father. And that affected his life. If you look at the story and the life of Moses, you'll find so many times where he gets angry. He took the tablets and he dashed them on the ground and he struck the rock when God said, speak to the rock. And today in society, we have a lot of angry men who don't know how to process their anger. They are not bad men. That's what we have to understand. They are not bad men, but suddenly, when there are emotions and feelings of rejection that come up, their response is anger. Sometimes fathers withhold love as a punishment for bad behavior. That's the worst thing you can do. Worst thing you can do. You see, our love has to be unconditional. First, because they are our children, and secondly, because we are Christian. But if you, as a young boy or a young girl, had love withheld from you, you will not know how to give love. David knew how to win battles on the battlefield. He was a great warrior, one of the greatest warriors in the nation of Israel. But David's ability to love his children and give expression to that love was a disaster. He was the most dysfunctional parent in the entire Bible. When David had issues in his household, he didn't know how to deal with them. And it came to a point where his son Absalom burnt a field to draw his father's attention. And David brings his son Absalom back to Jerusalem, but sees his face no more. Wow. This is the man of God we talk about and preach about. And I used to pastor first and parent second. And that was the mistake I made. And I've spent the last 15 years of my life trying to backtrack and trying to continue to reach out at every opportunity to make up for my shortfall by admitting to my children that I was wrong. It's hard. Men have a lot of pride. Not here, the ones in Australia only. We're very prideful. Why should I talk to my kid and say, I'm sorry? When you do that, you break the cycle of dysfunction in their lives. We always assume it's the child's fault. We always assume it's the teenager's fault. I provide for them. They want more than provision. They want our unconditional love. But remember this, David had to grow up without a father. The father was there but not there. David is called the son of Jesse. But in Psalm 27 verse 10, he's writing out of a context of personal pain. He said, though my father and my mother forsake me, God is there for me. But the problem with God is he's up there, you can't reach out and touch him. They say the first 6 years of a child's life are a time where the life, emotional life of the child is shaped. And if there is something missing there love-wise, agape love-wise, the child grows up with a bend emotionally. And so I have parents who come to me and their kids are rebelling and they say, you know, Pastor, they are a problem. I have to tell the father, I think you are the problem. You may not like me, but I got a straight shoot because that's my call from God. Because I tell the father, I know some things about you that you are not telling me now, but I'll tell you where you failed. And you got to have the humility to go to your child and say, look, I am sorry, I didn't know how to do it better, but from now on, together, we will start this journey again. That's all a child needs. My son at 16 stopped going to church because he didn't see me as a model of the Christian life and Christian parenthood. He saw me as a pastor that preaches on Sunday. Kids want more than that. And I'm talking to you out of my own painful, negative experience. What happens when you have a father wound? Number one, you struggle with your identity. Who am I? Who am I? I used to always ask the question, growing up, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, who am I? Who am I? Jesus needed an endorsement from his heavenly Father before he started ministry. How much more do our children need our validation? But do we often give it? I still remember the day my daughter did a valedictorian speech in her school, which was a Christian school, and I didn't show up because I had something else to do as a pastor. Oh God. What was important to her wasn't important to me, because when I was growing up, that's the way I was brought up. So I had to say sorry at some point in life. I had to heal the wound. And a wounded spirit, Bible says in Proverbs 18, who can bear? And then I began to realize that if the enemy can attack your relationship as a father, and one day some of you young men are going to be married, and you're going to have children, and if you have been brought up in a dysfunctional home and you don't choose to break that cycle through education, knowledge and understanding, you're going to see your kids repeat the cycle. And my son got into addictions that I was into. And there was no way I could do anything about it because he was an adult. But then we began to pray and believe God for restoration. That's what Malachi says in Malachi chapter 4, 5 to 6. In the last days, God is going to bring the hearts of the fathers back to the children. So the initiative has to be taken by us as a father. What Malachi is really talking about is generational healing and restoration between father and son, father and daughter. A wounded spirit who can bear? And a lot of men smile on the outside. You ask them, how are things? All right. It's not all right. It's all wrong. Sometimes we are hurting, but we are too proud to admit it. In our churches, we have pastors who are willing to help us walk on this journey of discipleship. You know, it's amazing, wherever you go in the world, the people who are most committed to a church are the women, not the men. The men don't feel the need to show up. They'll put money in the offering bag. But God doesn't need our money. He wants us to be good parents first. I mean, if you give the money, we'll take it. I'm serious. And I talk to kids sometimes. Because I know the heart, I know pastors' kids, I know what pastors' kids go through. I try to be a friend, a surrogate father to a pastor's kid, even though I haven't had that opportunity for my own children. And they feel safe to talk to me. And they're going through pain. And all we are focused on is ministry. Ministry begins at the home. And so we started praying. And one day, my son called a plumber to his house to do some repair work. And the guy was a Christian. He came and did the work and he went back. And 2 or 3 months later, he came back. He knocked on the door. And now he doesn't know my son is a pastor's kid, PK. And he said this to my son, he said, I don't know fully what's happening in your life, but when we were praying this afternoon in a Baptist church, by the way, Baptists are also going to heaven. When we were praying in the church in the afternoon prayer, God told me, go and tell that young man, it's time to come home. Wow. It's time to come home to the house of God. You know, my son would have fallen off his chair because when they were children, when they were born, we dedicated them to God. And no matter how far your kid may have lost their way, if you start praying and believing, God will bring them back to you again in the house of God. That's what it means. That's what it means. And the relationship that the enemy sought to fracture, God will restore. Number 2, 3, it affects my marriage. David's life was colored by anger. And in 2 Samuel, we have the story of him and his wife, Michal, and David is dancing before the ark and all that. and he comes home, to bless his house, it says. Okay, he comes home, 2 Samuel 6, to bless his house. Men are good at blessing the house, but they don't know how to speak to their wives. Only me, not you guys. Yeah, okay. If my wife wants something, I say, okay, go and buy it, I'll pay. They like that. Yesterday I was at the coffee shop downstairs at Robinson's, and I realized one thing: never ring my wife when I'm in the coffee shop. She's going to see this and I'm going to get into trouble. That's all right. I said, I just rang her, and she asked me, you're in the coffee, where are you? I said, I'm at Robinson's. So she asked me, what are you doing there? I said, I'm having coffee. You're at Robinson's. And then I know her mind is working. There are handbags there, there's jewelry there. I said, I got to go. We're good at doing those things. But to express love, L-O-V-E, agape, which is a verb, a doing thing, is so hard for a man. When a man buys a gift for a woman, he'll just take the Robinson bag and give it to her. Because for him, the value is in the gift. For her, the value is in the packaging. So you can buy a cheap gift and put it in a little extra packaging, you'll get away with it. Now you know the secret. It affects your ability to relate to God as a father. I can't understand God as a father. I can't. I really can't. And God said, it's okay. I know what you've gone through. I understand what has shaped you. But from time to time, by the grace of God, I'll reach out to you and I'll begin to heal you. For 2 hours last night, I was weeping. Weeping is something has gone wrong in the emotional system. That's the sign. It's a sign of pain. But God, by His grace, can take us and use us in spite of the pain, because He's God. So we've got to be honest with ourselves. Because if we are not, strongholds build up. A lot of Christians have mental strongholds. And when I look at why people move from church to church, it's not because they don't like the pastor. It's often because they see authority figures as a source of pain, because that's how their father was. They're not bad people. But the moment they sense the authority is strong here, they want to get out. Because they want to be in a place where they can do what they want to. Because they say, I am not going to submit to authority. And we have people like that all over the world. And if we don't understand them, which is hard, they carry what we call an orphan spirit. Orphan spirit. An orphan spirit is a lack of affirmation from an earthly father. And so you begin to see authority figures as a source of pain. So in the story of David, David knew how to do battle well, but he didn't know how to love his children the way they wanted to be loved. David loved them. In 2 Samuel chapter 18, verse 33, for want of time, David heard that Absalom, his son, died. And David stands in the gate of the city and he weeps and he says, "Oh, Absalom, Absalom, my son, if I had died, not you." Wow. Wow. Too little, too late. And some of you are here not in this morning, not listening to this by accident. Today is Father's Day. And you can give your children a fresh start emotionally by saying, I was wrong. I didn't know how to do it. But we are in this together. And with your help, I can become the father God wants me to be. I find it hard to speak love to my children. Really hard. But I put it in words. Do it. Don't put it off for tomorrow. Last night, early morning, 3-4 messages which I got off social media. I told my son how precious he is to me, even though I can't put it verbally. Because that can bring healing to his wounded spirit. But we got to be honest. When I was 29 years old, by God's grace, He touched my life. But I also realized that Genesis 50 verse 20, that what the enemy planned for evil for my life, God eventually turned to good. Because today, I am a father to hundreds of pastors in Sri Lanka. And I couldn't father them unless I had gone through the experience. So the enemy planned for evil, but God turned it to good. To give us a hope and to give us a future. And today my greatest ministry comes out of my deepest pain. Because I don't know how to preach a sermon, structure-wise. I left school when I was 15 years old. Drop out, so that was one. I grew up in a very poverty environment. 2, number 3, I was into all sorts of addictions because of a father wound. But when I came to know Christ, God brought into my life one man who was a Christian lay preacher who became a sort of father to me. And I can honestly say everything I do in the universe today is not only because of the grace of God, because God sent the right man to carry me when I needed to be carried. Right person. He too had a father. But out of his journey, he poured into mine. And so we love people unconditionally in spite of their failings. Because God looks beyond the limitation. In Luke chapter 15, we have the story of the parable of the prodigal son. He came to his senses and he said, I am here. I am violating boundaries. I am rebelling against my parents. And you know, when I become an adult, I am going to get out of my home. I am not going to come back. He came to himself and said, there is safety, security, destiny, and purpose in my Father's house. Don't be a rebel. Rebellion is a bad choice. And even though the enemy will try to move you into the field of rebellion, there will be a damaging consequence. So don't go there. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with God. The young man felt like a victim, but he chose to break the cycle. And you know what? The father reached out to him. That's important. Father reached out. The father was standing and waiting and looking for the day the son will return, because the father knew the Heavenly Father's will is reconciliation in the context of every family household. God has the power to turn the hardest heart around. And when the son came home, there was joy and restoration. So I want to encourage you today, no matter what happened or didn't happen in your childhood, God's purpose will prevail if you refuse to allow bitterness and rebellion to enter your spirit like Absalom. And if you're a father, don't end up with Absalom. You have a role to play, a very important one. And that is to reach out and be not just a provider to your family, but to be a friend to your children. And in Asian cultures, that seems very hard and challenging. Oh, I'm afraid I'll lose my authority. Yeah, you may lose your authority, but you'll also lose your son or your daughter. And then you weep. Teenage suicide is on the rise. Because sometimes we as parents put pressure on our kids to do something beyond their capacity. Because we can't trust God with their destiny. You know, when I used to go to school and I come with my highest mark in school was 65 out of 100 for drawing, artwork. And you know why the teacher gave me 65? To bump my grades so I won't feel embarrassed. I didn't care anyway. In my school, when I was 14 years old, we had a class of 32. And I used to come top 3 from the wrong side. But God still had a destiny for my life. So has He for yours. So you may not be academically bright. I ended up general manager of a multinational company in Sri Lanka and export manager of a chemical company in Australia, chemical company, not knowing H2O is water. Because God is God. And so I want to encourage you today. Don't let discouragement seep into your spirit. Don't let rebellion. You tell yourself, you know, my parents are on my back for my grades. I used to be on my son's back for his grades. He hated mathematics. Hated it. Every Saturday morning, I had to pull him by his 2 legs and put him in my car, one green sock, one brown sock, sometimes one yellow sock, one green sock, and take him for tuition. He hated it. And I used to pay $25 for a class, $100 a month, waste of money. And one day, he got the bright idea. He said, you are forcing me to do mathematics. When you went grade 10 for a mathematics exam in an auditorium of 1,000 people, you got the exam paper, A4, with my name printed, class printed. I got the paper. I took a pen. I wrote something. And 5 minutes later, I put my hand up. In less than 5 minutes. Because you can't talk, you have to put the hand up. And the examiner came and said, can I help you? I said, no. I finished. He said, what? You finished? I said, yes. And I gave him the paper. No, I don't understand call of God, this, that, you know, I'm drinking, smoking, partying, rioting. And you know what I wrote on the paper? Mathematics is impossible for me. That's not the end of the story. I have grandchildren. And I was telling this story to my 2 older grandchildren. And somehow or other, they must have repeated the story to my grandson who's 6 years old. And a week after that, he's telling his mom, I can't go to school because I hate mathematics. The cycle repeats itself. 6 years. And his mother asked him, where did you pick that up? Oh, my sister told me grandpa did that. Good example, huh? There we go, but for the grace of God. In Colossians chapter 2, verse 10 says, you are complete in Him. The word complete there means God fills up the empty holes in our life. Because He's God. God is a father to the fatherless. He's a husband to the widow. And through my entire 50 years, I have seen the sustaining grace of God every moment I need it. That's why I can sing the goodness of God. He's a father, He's a friend, He is your confidant. All may fail you, but God is faithful. Hallelujah.